So, if the content and quality of your writing doesn't matter, how does a book sell? How does a book become a bestseller? A book sells based on the author's ability to excite his or her fan base. Now, I have heard many people come up to me and say, but what about word of mouth? Word of mouth sells right, doesn't it? You know, the answer is no, not really. In my experience, unless you sell 500,000 copies of your book, word of mouth will never pick up. Does selling 500,000 books sound daunting to you? Yeah. That's because it is. You know, out of my 43 New York Times bestselling authors, only 5 have ever sold more than 500,000 copies. 5. But I wouldn't consider any of them failures. When Roy launched his book, he sold 100,000 copies. He launched it to number 1 on the Wall Street Journal and number 3 on the New York Times bestsellers list. Before Roy launched Secret Formulas of the Wizard of Ads, he was doing 50 seminars a year at $5,000 a pop. Afterwards, he did 67 the following year at $20,000 per speech. Now, Roy sold 100,000 copies, was number 1 on the New York Times, or on the Wall Street Journal, and number 3 on the New York Times, and he increased the amount of money he made in 1 year by about $1.3 million, and his book's a failure? I sure as hell don't think so. But 100,000 copies of his book is all he sold. Word of mouth did not pick up. So, what is a bestseller? Some ideas? No, but what is a bestseller? It gets attention, but what does that mean? But how do you make it on the list? You sell books. Simply put, you do a really great job marketing your book, you sell loads of copies, and the bestseller lists pick up on that fact. The bestsellers lists track sales over a month or weekly period of time for the categories of books that they include on their lists. What most people don't realize is that most academic superior books don't appear on the bestsellers list. In fact, there are many books that outsell contemporary bestsellers that never make it onto the bestsellers list. Now, I don't want you to raise hands, but I assume we have several Christians here in this audience. There is a book that has sold so well that you have never seen it on the bestsellers list. The Bible. Why? Because it doesn't sell enough books in the right time frame through the right reporting channels. Who are the bestsellers lists that I care about anyway? The New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and Business Week. Now, many people ask me, but what about Amazon.com? That counts, doesn't it? You know, not so much. Here's the deal. Every retailer has their own internal bestsellers list. Every retailer. Books A Million, the 4th largest chain in the country, has their own internal bestsellers list. But we never hear about people saying, I'm going to promote you to be a Books A Million bestseller. Why? Because it's harder to do that than it is to do marketing intentionally to hit number 1 on Amazon. But here's the real key. Outside of this room, outside of authors, if you walk out on the street and ask an average person if they care if your book's an Amazon.com bestseller, what do you think they're going to say? No, they don't care. It's not about being an Amazon.com bestseller. It is a nice goal, but it should never be the goal. The New York Times works this way. they require reporting from multiple retailers. Amazon.com is one retailer. One retailer. If you sold 50,000 copies of your book at Amazon.com in 1 week, but only sold 5,000 copies of your book through all the other retailers in that same week, you would not make the New York Times bestsellers list. The New York Times bestsellers list wants to be indicative of what's selling nationwide. Amazon.com is indicative of one type of buyer. It would be like saying, with Books A Million, that we're going to say that books that are selling in the South are the same books that are selling in the North or on the West Coast. It doesn't work that way, and they will never allow a book on the bestsellers list if your sales are through only a finite amount of retailers. So, to sum up myth number 4, to be a bestseller, your book has to be well written. To be a bestseller, a book has to be well marketed.